question: when did you first feel validated as an herbalist? I've been dabbling into herbal medicine for ages, and I'm currently undergoing more formal education, but still struggling with naysayers and self-doubt. So do your best to avoid naysayers. They're always going to be around. I personally think it's too commonly tolerated for more experienced herbalists to be down on beginning herbalists just because they're still beginning herbalists. I totally do get 100% that there are people who are giving oversimplified and reckless information around health issues. I totally get there are people who are promoting irresponsible and unsustainable use of plants and everything. And that's not great. That's bad. But I think that in a lot of cases, it's just as easy to give encouragement and direction and alternative ways. Like you can address the situation in a way that swings the conversation or the presentation of issues in a certain way without having to be a naysayer or to diss the other person. If I think about my experience, I really benefited back in the days of Henriette's Old Herbalist, to bring that up again, that there were herbalists like Paul Bergner and like Michael Moore and like Henriette Kress on there. I'm leaving other people out, that were established. And, if I responded with something that was maybe like more simplistic, like, listing my favorite antispasmodics for menstrual cramps, and then, Paul Bergner posted on it, he didn't say like, hey, Jim McDonald, that's really irresponsible to be, suggesting antispasmodics for menstrual cramps rather than starting with thinking about whether magnesium deficiency was, is at play. He would just make another thread and say like, a lot of issues around menstrual cramping may have their roots in magnesium deficiency, and we need to think about that before we just suggest antispasmodics. There was no need to, throw in a diss along with that. So that's something that I think we can do. That's something that I think that we can think when we see something online or in person in a class and we're like, I don't know quite what I think about the way that was presented, or that didn't include this and that didn't include that. We can think like, how can I interject that concept or that idea or my experience with this into the discussion without overstepping or without having to sort of diss the other people. I started teaching classes maybe 3-ish years to beginning my informal study of herbalism. And now sometimes people that I know, people who are my friends, will say things like, that person's out there and offering classes and they don't know enough. And I just think I didn't know enough when I started teaching. And it was actually the act of teaching. It was the act of teaching is what gave me the experiences. It's what gave me enough connection to other people and gave me the opportunities to use herbs that grew my experience. So now I do know stuff. And I think the key factor here is teaching or suggesting or practicing within reasonable scope of experience. So beginning herbalist, suggesting chamomile or mint for digestive distress. That's totally cool. If someone's like, oh, but I have ulcerative colitis, you wouldn't say just take chamomile. It's anti-inflammatory and it helps to, with infections and it helps to heal tissues and it's soothing and that's all you need to do. That would be borderline where we get into irresponsibility. But we want to think about that. I started teaching like 3 years into it. And, sometimes when I say to people when they're like, oh, this person's doing this, I'm like, I did that too, right? And I might occasionally hear like, oh yeah, but you're different. And I am not different. I'm not. I mean, I'm a different person, obviously, but I'm not different. Like, I just use my experience teaching to grow my knowledge. And over time, slowly over time, my knowledge grew. And now generally, I think at least a bunch of people seem to think positively of me. And it's because of the way that I learned. And the way that I learned was through teaching early on. So it's not necessarily bad. Don't let people be down on you. If they're like, hey, you presented something like this and you really kind of missed out on this or missed out on that, think about it. Think about whether that's a valid explanation, or we need to think about that and then integrate it into the way you're doing things. But don't just let people be naysayers to you or to other people, and try not to be a naysayer if you can actually be someone who's more supportive. This goes back to the way that I was treated by Rosemary and Christopher Headley and so many other people. We can support each other rather than being critical of each other, and that should be our first course of action if we can.